All right, welcome back.
Welcome back. All right, I'm still Christopher Harrison. That's still John Galloway.
Still John Galloway. I'm going to pretend like I had spaghetti for lunch, although it was a delicious sandwich.
Yes,
it was good.
Yes.
So,
there was no spaghetti, unfortunately.
No spaghetti.
There was some level of carbs. Yeah. So,
hope you all enjoyed your meal of choice. We got to answer some questions on the chat. Thank you for the great questions and interaction.
Yep. Yeah. There's been a lot of great questions coming in. We're loving it.
So I'm going to go through and answer a few that have come up over and over. So one question is, where can I find out more? Where, we're covering a lot of information. Where can I get more specific? Where can I find some tutorials, et cetera? If we can cut to my desktop here. So the ASP.NET website, we put a lot of work into this. I'm one of the advisors on the content for this. So this site, we just did a design update for it. This has been updated so it'll work well on your phone or whatever. So it's got responsive design. It'll work. The videos will play on an iPad or whatever you have. So we've really been putting a lot of work into that. We also curate the content here. So that's a fancy word for meaning we sweat over the content quite a bit. So all this, if you go to asp.net/MVC, that's the link. Or you can just go to the ASP.NET page and click on MVC. And in that we have the first thing you'll hit is this kind of content map, and it tells you how to get started. So here we have the building a first app. We have Rick Anderson's amazing MVC4 content map. So that's where he goes through and puts together a lot of in-depth information. So this is the first place to look if you want to know anything about really in-depth stuff. So say, for instance, you want to know about security in MVC. He's got a big old list of things there. So Rick and I have batted these back and forth over the years. He spends a lot of time on it. He's really got a great list. So we've got that's what you got on the Overview tab. We have some tutorials. You can get started with a lot of tutorials. And then we also have some great videos. And we have some Pluralsight videos available for free on the site. So this Pluralsight building applications with MVC4, this is K. Scott Allen, some great stuff. So I just want to, that is my recommended next place to go for learning more information is just go to the ASP.NET site. There's this Learn thing up at the top, and you click on MVC. It's all there. One thing people forget about, too, is that you can search. So if you type in data annotations, maybe I spelled it right. And so this is, we've done some work to make the search actually work pretty well on there. So there's that. The next step is people said, how do I control the HTML that's output from helpers? The HTML helpers. So we've got the display template and the editor templates can be overridden. So we're not going to dig into that in detail, but there is, if you search on MSDN for templated helpers, and then way down in here, it tells you how to actually override those. So you can create a new helper, and there's examples in C# and V, and it shows you how to do that. So it's really just add a folder into your application, and then you put in your view, and you just write the view, and MVC will look for your own templates before it uses its own built-in ones. The last thing is, some people have asked about localizing things like, so like how something's displayed. The display name for something. Email is maybe spelled differently in Chinese, right? So you can use resources to do that. So since these are using system component model data annotations, you can go in here and you can look, and you'll see that these actually have overrides in order to allow setting resources. So here you can go in and you can set, if you look, error message resource type and error message resource name. So that's the short answer. People that have done localization know that it can get pretty complex. So let me point you to a few things, and these are listed on that ASP.NET content map that I told you about that Rick does. First of all, Scott Hanselman has done some big posts on just about everything in the world, but also localization and MVC. So he goes into this in some depth. And Guy Smith-Ferrier is like an international expert on internationalization. We've talked to him several times about how to make things work well. He's done some conference presentations, and he has some code available to download. So I recommend his information. He has some great things for in the real world how to really do international websites. So that's it for me.
Okay, that sounds great.
Now it's time for JavaScript.
It is time for JavaScript. All right. Waiting for the slides to load. No, I'm not going to do a dance. That's actually my gift to you. You're very welcome. So now, what we want to roll into is making our pages more responsive, making our pages more robust. And all of that's going to be done with JavaScript. Now, what we're going to see in this module is really kind of two halves. We're going to talk a bit about AJAX and partial page updates. So that way, if you've got sort of the outside and you just want to update one little portion, you can do that by utilizing a partial page update. Again, for those of you that have done web forms, you might already be familiar with this with the little update panel. Now we're going to see the MVC form of that. The second half is going to be about utilizing JavaScript, utilizing jQuery, and incorporating that into our applications. Let's start off and take a look at our partial page updates. So this begs the question, what is a partial page update? Well, it's sort of like the name implies, that only a portion of the page is going to be updated. It's going to be partially updated. And I like the way that this slide breaks everything down for you. That what's going to happen is we're going to have our normal user request. The user request is going to come in. It's, again, stop me if you've heard this before. It's going to call a method on an object. I know. And then that method's going to do some stuff. And the eventual HTML is then going to be sent back out to the user. And so that's going to give us the full page. Now, in the scenario that I'm going to be demonstrating here momentarily, what's going to happen is I'm going to show you the details as I explode onto the scene. I'm going to be showing you the details of a particular session. And what I want to have happen is I want people to be able to add comments into that session. And when they add their comments in, I want them to be able to hit submit, and I want them to be able to stay right there on that page. So the only thing that should update is just that little portion of the form where the, or just that portion of the page where the form is and where the list of comments is. So that way they go in, they type in whatever it is they want, they hit submit, boom, it just appears right on that page without having to reload everything else. Now what needs to happen is the request needs to be sent up and sent back behind the scenes, only updating just that portion of the page. Now, the magic that's going to make that work behind the scenes is a little object called the XML HTTP request object. And we can, through our own JavaScript, go ahead and call that manually on our own. But wouldn't it be nice if there was a little tool that could do that for us? And wouldn't it be nice if it was already built into MVC? And, well, since obviously I'm hinting at it, let's go with the assumption that, yes, as a matter of fact, there is. Now, in order to incorporate AJAX into our applications, here's what I want you to notice as far as the basic steps go. Step one is to create your web application without AJAX. Just write it out. Just do what you're normally going to do. Nothing fancy whatsoever. Just write your application. Then what you're going to want to do for whichever portions you want to be updated for just the partial page update, go ahead and convert those into our partial update. So we'll go ahead, add in all the different views, and go ahead and make them partial. So as I kick over here to our demo, what we're going to see is sort of like a cooking show. I have behind the scenes, hey, here's the cake. I've already made the cake, so to speak. I've done a bit of work over lunch getting a couple of things ready for this. And I'm just waiting for my system here. There we go. And let me bring back up my Visual Studio. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the portion of the cake that I've baked here. First of all, inside of my models, and by the way, you'll notice that, John, I just left you with all of your stuff alone. You hurt my feelings by going in and deleting everything. Yes, I kept it back up. kidneys. So took care of all that.
Done, well done.
So thank you, thank you. So back over
I'll get
here.
you next time.
What I've got is I've got my little comment class that I've added in. You'll notice that it's got our comment ID. It's got a content. That's the little text that's going to be displayed out. There's the session ID and the session that's going to be associated with. What you'll also notice is if I open up my session here, is I've added, oops, I guess I didn't, but I can do that now. Public, virtual, let's go ahead and say list of comments. I guess my cake wasn't fully baked. I'm icing my cake, he said, beating an analogy into the
Just
ground.
enough,
Yeah. But anyway, so there's my little comments. And you'll also notice that I added that into the context over here. So you'll notice that I've got my my sessions, my speakers, my comments. By the way, I love the symmetry as this currently sits.
Up.
Everything lines up. That makes
beautiful.
That makes me very happy. All right. Now the next part is I created a controller here. And there is a decent amount that's going on inside of this controller. There's going to be 3 different moving parts here. The first moving part that we have right now is going to be our get for session. And the goal of this is to get us all the comments for a particular session. And so you'll notice right here that I've got the code to go off, query our context, go get all that back. By the way, just to go back to something that we mentioned this morning, for those of you that are a little late, where were you? No, for those of you that were a little late, one of the big things about the demos that we're walking through is you're going to notice that they're not necessarily always going to be fully implemented, that we haven't created a repository, we haven't created a service, we haven't done anything like that. So you'll notice that I am putting my query code directly into my action here. Best practice, that's not the way that I want to do things, but again, for our demonstrations, this will be just fine. So, coming back to my code, you'll notice that I've got the query right there, making sure that we did in fact get the session. And then you're going to notice that we're going to return back our view. Now, this part right here, we'll put it in orange, you'll notice is a bit different from what we've seen. That in the past, we've always been returning back a view. Now, if you remember back to the slide that we had up a minute ago, we walked through the steps. One of the steps, or the first step was, build this without anything fancy. So just create your normal view. I've sort of skipped ahead just a little bit that I'm already returning back our partial view. Now this was something that we talked a little bit about towards the end of the last module, and this is sort of bringing that back together again, is you're going to notice that we're now going to have inside of our controller an action that will return back a partial view. So there's my little code to return back the partial view, and you'll also notice up at the very top there, there is the return type, so our partial view result. The next thing that you're going to notice...
If I can jump in just for a second, leave it on this code here. We had a few questions come in over the chat, and just a reminder that underscore at the beginning of get for session and comment form, that is for the, that underscore means it's for a partial, right? So
Correct.
Those views are prefix with an underscore, and
Exactly.
then this just matches up with that.
Exactly, yeah, just that, that convention there.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. Okay, cool. So the next part, so there's the list. The next part is our comment form. So this is where you're going to be able to type out your comment. So again, we need to go grab whichever session ID it is that you want. And what you're going to notice here is that I'm going to create a brand new comment to send on down. And this is a very common technique. So that way, if there's any surrounding information that I need to make sure gets sent back to, in our case, our separate action, our submit, I can make sure that all of that's there. So we can go ahead and create the object, seed it with whatever data it is that we need, and then send that down. You'll notice that we'll use our hidden fields to kind of store that behind the scenes, and then when it's submitted back, all that information will come back. So to a certain extent, this isn't the proper terminology, but it's the way that I like to think about it, that when I send it down, my object is going to be dehydrated, that it's just going to be written out into that form. The user will add on the additional information. When they hit submit, it'll now be rehydrated. It'll now be brought back to life, and so all that information that I seeded inside of there will be coming back to me. So if we go back to the code, you'll notice here on my submit, now I'll have the comment and I know that it will have the appropriate session ID to go along with it. Inside of the bottom here, you'll notice, once again, I'm taking a couple of shortcuts. I'm okay with this. You'll notice that I'm just going to add it right in. I'm not going to check to see whether or not it's valid. I at least have the validate anti-forgery token, but I'm not going to worry about checking to see if it's valid, exceptions, anything like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and load back up our partial view and send that on out the door. So 3 moving parts here. Number 1 is to get the list of all comments for a session. That's that first part. The second part is to create the little form that you're going to submit. And then finally, the third part is to actually accept the brand new comment. So there's our 3 little actions. The last part is our views. So what I did first of all, let me open up session here, is I set up a details view for a session where I'm being very complex here. You'll notice that what I'm going to do, I know, isn't that?
Right.
Yep. I'm going to display the title and I'm going to display the abstract.
Slow down a bit here.
All right, I apologize. Yep. Then what you're going to notice down below, and this is the other part to our partial views, is I'm going to call HTML action. Now, you may remember from the view module, we talked about the HTML action link. And what that's going to do for us is that's going to create a link. It's going to create an anchor tag. This, however, is going to go find the particular action at that controller and call it. Now, a lot of times when people see this and they hear me say, this is now going to call that action, they immediately think, oh, wait a minute, that's going to go down to the client and have the client call that. And that's not what happens. This is all on the server. So this is not going to generate a whole bunch of new round trips. So this, once again, allows me that reuse, that allows me that centralized code that I can create this partial view, and I can just keep calling it as often as I want. Mm-hmm. The last part to this little method that you're going to notice is the third parameter. And my third parameter, and I'm getting a lot of ink on my, my screen here, is this right here. If you remember back to our get by session, and let me just put this out onto a separate screen, not really the snap feature, but that's okay, and Windows 7 was my idea. I want, always dealing with a smaller screen, there we go. So what you're going to notice is on my get for session, there is a parameter here called session ID. I need to make sure that we pass that in. You're going to notice that that right there is going to link up. So the way that I can pass in parameters as needed, or route data as it's called, is by creating an anonymous object. So whatever parameters it is that you need, just go ahead and put that in as properties on your anonymous object, set the values, and that once again, through our default binder, will automatically be wired up.
So just to make sure this all makes sense, somebody watching, if you got lost anywhere along the way.
Yep.
We are showing one view, and then we're calling back using html.action. We're calling back, and we're running an action that's going to return a partial view.
Right.
And the results of that partial view are going to be just some HTML that's then injected back into that
Correct.
page. So that it's basically like a user control anywhere else, and this
Yeah.
just go off, run this controller action, get me a little bit of HTML and return it.
Yep. That's
and it's
exactly
reusable.
it. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Perfect.
Okay, so let me put this back to, get back to where it once belonged. And I've got my little details. Okay, so let me go back over here to my Solution Explorer. Let's open up my comment. you'll notice my get for session. And on my get for session, I've got a nifty little div tag that all my comments are going to be contained in. And I'm going to loop through all of my comments here. And I'm going to display them out in an unordered list. Again, very creative with my UI, I know.
Yep.
I know. And then you're going to notice down below that I'm going to set up my little form. It's going to call that submit method that I created. It's going to be on the comment controller, and it's going to send that information up via post. You're going to notice that I did put in the anti-forgery token, and that is honestly just out of instinct, that you really want to get your fingers trained, that the moment that you say HTML begin form, if you're typing it out manually like me and not necessarily using the scaffolding like John, if you're typing it out manually, just train your brain. The moment that you say HTML begin form, the next thing that should be coming off your fingers is that call right there to the anti-forgery token. Just get yourself into that habit right away. All right. Then you're going to notice that we'll go ahead and once again call another little partial view. And that's going to be our comment form. And our comment form is extremely complex. Once again, you're going to notice that we've got our little form right here, our label and our editor. You're going to notice that we've got the button down here at the very bottom to submit it back. And then up towards the top, this is what I was hinting at before when I was talking about creating the comment. That I need to grab the session ID. I need to hang on to that. So I'm just going to throw that into a hidden field. So that was that dehydration, rehydration that I was sort of going with for an analogy, that I get that empty comment, it's got the session ID, I'm going to store that here, so that way when we submit the form, the session ID will be there. So that way we'll be able to associate the comment with that session.
Now, let me ask you a real quick question just to make sure we're all on the same page. I've seen some questions coming in on chat. At this point, this is not yet an AJAX request, right? This is all done in the view. So what happens is the first request comes in, I think, for details, and then details says, the details view also says HTML.action. That's run while the view is being rendered. It calls
on
in
the server.
On the server. All this is still on the server.
All on the server.
So when the view is rendered, it says, oh, go get some more HTML from this controller action, does that, and then it sends the entire rendered page down to the browser. So that HTML.action is really just abstracting out almost like a control. But it's all run at the same time in render time.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Cool. So we've got all these moving parts, and just like John mentioned, and this is a very big point here, and I want, which tab? I want that tab. There's the one that I want. So what I want you to notice is begin form. So I haven't done anything at all with AJAX. Now, if I bring up my page here, and let's say session details 1, there is our very basic little form. You'll notice once again, I want spaghetti. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. Okay. So there is our little I want spaghetti, and you'll notice right down here that we're looking for the content of the comment that they're going to be typing in, and then you'll notice our little button. Here's what I want to have happen. That right now, the way that this currently sits is if I type in a comment, let's say red sauce or white for your spaghetti, big question, and I submit the comment, the way that this is currently built is you'll notice that it just takes us to a brand new page.
I don't like that.
No, neither do I. Neither do I. That what I want, and let me refresh the page, show that we actually did save our comment, is we just want that part right there to update. Leave everything else on this screen here. That was a lot of fun to do. Leave everything else on this screen here alone and just update that portion right there.
I'd like that.
We'd like that. Okay. Have you decided if you want red or white sauce yet?
Let's go red sauce.
Red sauce?
Yeah.
Okay.
Traditional.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So I've got all the moving parts in place. Now all I need to do is one very simple little update. So instead of saying begin form, whoops, let me just Control K, Control C, comment. No, that wasn't what I wanted you to do. Come here, Visual Studio.
Why I oughta.
Yeah. And by the way, yes, I do talk to inanimate objects. It's when they start talking back that I realize it's time to go home. So back over here, I'm going to say using, and then AJAX, begin form. Now, the way that this is going to work is it's going to, sort of like up above, it's going to be looking for the particular action that I want. It's going to be looking for the controller that I want. If there are any route values or anything like that that I need to pass in, I can do that there. And then you'll also notice, in my case, it's going to be looking for my AJAX options. So I'm going to say new AJAX options, and I'm going to set my update target ID to be comments. All right. Now, for right now, I'm just going to type that out. Let's make sure I've got all that. Cool. Let's talk about what I just did here.
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I want to highlight right away, begin form from above, begin form from below. So again, in both cases, this is basically going to be a form. And just like a form, it's going to be looking for, if I kick over to our comment form here, it's going to be looking for a submit button. Okay. So just like a normal form. You're going to notice, once again, just like a normal form, that it's going to be calling our submit action. It's going to be doing that on the comment controller. The difference is how this is going to take place. With our normal form, what happens is it's sent up via post. The entire page is going to be refreshed. Not what we want. What we want is just that little portion to be updated. This is going to be done through AJAX. Now, for those of you who've done web forms, the way that you do this with web forms is by utilizing an update panel. The nice part about the update panel is that everything that I want refreshed for our AJAX call just goes inside the update panel. Very easy. And that winds up being our little visual container. We don't have controls here. We don't have visual containers. So what we need to do is we need to tell the environment essentially where that container is. So if we kick back to the code, what you'll notice is this little target update ID comments, you'll notice right over there is our little div tag with an ID of comments. So the end result is just this portion is going to be updated.
So to step way back a second, you had a page.
Yep.
And you could have just had a controller, and it could have had a post button and all that. And then you said, well, I want this to use AJAX. So step one was you converted to a partial, and that partial was still all rendered on the server. So you were calling HTML.action, but that allowed you to do it in a step where you said, yeah, this all still works. And here's, build a controller and HTML.action. That was done on the server. Now what you're able to do is, because it's a partial, you can say AJAX begin form, and that's able to make those updates just to that partial.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
That's exactly it. So if I go in, do a build here, just that little change, bring back up my page. Let's say session details 1. And I knew I was going to get a build error because I need an open curly right there. There we go. Okay. Take 2, session details. You'll notice it's still pulling out that red or white sauce. Let's go ahead and say content. We said we preferred a red.
Sure.
There we go, red sauce, please. Let's go ahead and hit submit comment. And you'll notice that now the only portion of the page that updated was just that.
Right.
That is the magic of our partial page updates.
Okay, great. So right there, that's doing the whole thing. That's doing an AJAX update. That's working. It's calling into controllers.
Exactly.
All wires together.
Yep. Now, I will confess, there was one last little thing that I did behind the scenes to make sure that this was going to work. I like my demos to work. I'm funny that way. I know.
Whatever suits you, man.
Hey,
I don't know.
But you'll notice if I go into our layout, down here at the very bottom, there is a call to a handful of script bundles. And what our bundles are going to do is be able to send down a group of scripts in one request. Because your browsers are going to be limited in the number of concurrent requests they're going to have. So if you've got 15 different JavaScript files, it's now going to have to make 15 different requests. That's going to slow things down. It'd be nice if we could, bundle them together, send them down in one shot. And so part of the jQuery val bundle is the JavaScript that makes all of that little bit of magic work.
Do you think we have time for a real quick look at like bundle config and talk about bundling?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you can pop that open.
Sure. So you're going to make me your code monkey.
I am, because you've got it running over there. If I get to edit your code, I'm going to break it. You know what I do.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to keep this here.
Okay, so let's switch over to the code, and I'll have you point it out.
Okay.
So there you've got bundle config, and what that does is it defines bundles, and so it says when you in your page reference a script, tilde bundle jQuery or tilde bundle jQuery UI or jQuery val, then it's going to pull in one or more scripts. And so that's really kind of the idea. Then within those pages, you're able to, and I know you pointed out some of this, but I just want to make sure it's clear. You say things like, there we've got our scripts rendered at the bottom of the page, and so then we can say scripts.render, and it'll render out a bundle, and that bundle, jQuery val, can contain more than one script. And so these bundles are compressed. One other beautiful thing, if you can, up in the top there, you've got that jQuery bundle, and see how it has scripts, jQuery dash, and version is I don't know what you call that. It's filled in. It's a Mad Lib fill in the blank, right? And so what's beautiful there is you can update jQuery in your application, and the bundle will automatically find it, and it'll show it. So you don't have to go find replace through your entire app when you update the jQuery version.
Exactly.
So there's a lot more you can do with bundling. There's all kinds of crazy ways you can override it, but just the built-in, scripts, it just simplifies things quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it improves performance quite a bit, too.
Yep.
That's all.
Cool. No, that was perfect. And let me put that back up there. And that actually gave me an opportunity to make sure I've got jQuery UI in there. Once again, making sure that my demos work. Again, I'm funny that way. All right. So let's go back over here to our slides. There we go. Again, not dancing. You are welcome. So let's talk a bit about doing our JavaScript manually. The best code in the world is the code that's already written. So if you can take advantage of that AJAX helper, hey, do it. But there are going to be times when you want something a bit more manual, that you want to be able to make the calls yourself. Or maybe you want to be able to introduce things that there just isn't a helper, an MVC helper already built in for you. This is where doing our own JavaScript comes into play. So the first little thing is we do need to add in our JavaScript files. Now, we've already seen how to add in the JavaScript files by using the bundling. The other way, of course, to add in a JavaScript file is to utilize the, let's see if this, it just looks like a 4-year-old grabbed a crayon, I know, my little script tag. Now, one very important thing is that if you are going to reference a script file, make sure that you use the longhand to close out the script. Because if you don't use the longhand, if you just use the shorthand where you just simply put the // right there, all that happens is it simply doesn't pull in your script files.
Yeah, I've done that a few times.
No error messages, it just doesn't pull in your script files.
Right.
Yep. All right. So there's the first part. The second part then is how are we going to send down our scripts? Now, we can serve up our scripts all on our own, but we can also take advantage of a content delivery network. Content delivery network is simply a series of servers hosted by, in this case, let's say Microsoft, and that's going to serve up a lot of the more common scripts that we're going to want people to be able to access. Now, what's nice about a CDN is a couple of different things. Number one, takes load off of our servers, but also number two is that this can point the user at a server that's closer geographically to them and hopefully help improve performance. Now, we've been using these templates, and as John mentioned earlier this morning, when he created his first little project, that there was a whole bunch of items that were being added in through NuGet packages. Now, what's nice about a NuGet package, as John mentioned, is that it's that self-contained ball. It makes it very easy for me to update, and the NuGet packages can go in and make the appropriate changes to my project. So unlike in the past where I maybe had to reference a DLL and then go into my web.config and update this and go into my global AJAX and update that, now all I have to do is just right-click, say add NuGet package, type in the name that I want, hit install, and away it goes from there.
And that's great that you mentioned, NuGet packages, a lot of people think they're just for adding an assembly, and they work great for that. But NuGet packages can also add in JavaScript. And at first, I remember myself being a little, boggled by that, and other people saying, why would you use package management for JavaScript? But it's actually great because, at least two reasons. One is they can have dependencies. So you can say jQuery validation requires jQuery, and it needs to be at this version. And then another thing is that you can do clean updates. So you can go right through and you can say update these packages, and you can say I want to update jQuery validation, and jQuery validation says, well, okay, but then you need to update jQuery as well, right? So it handles all that. They work very well together and is perfect for JavaScript.
Exactly. The other big thing to go right along with jQuery is this. So here's our little slide talking a little bit about jQuery and what jQuery does and the magic that it does for us. jQuery is a JavaScript library. I always like to just think of it as sort of like an API. That what this is going to do is this is going to make our lives easier. That the benefit, I sums it up perfectly, reduces the amount of code that you need to write, reduces your development time. Now, where it all starts is right here. That I need to go find, stay there, pen. There we go. I need to go find an object. Now, depending on the browser that I'm using, depending on where I am, that might have to be done differently. And every web developer that's listening to us right now has probably had to deal with the loving wonderfulness that is dealing with cross-browser compatibility issues. jQuery handles this for us. That when I go in and I say I want this particular item, regardless of the browser, it will go off and find that item for me. I don't need to worry about it. The second part is you'll notice that it's built basically just like CSS. So if I want all elements of a particular type, I can just say the name. If I want one specific element, I can say the ID by, just like in CSS, using the pound. Or if it's a class, I can use the little dot for the class as well. So it makes it very easy for me to find an individual item, and it makes it very easy for me to find a whole group of items. Now, once I've got it, then I could go in and start to set up different events. I could also go in and modify attributes. Now, the easiest part of the attribute modification that jQuery offers, I think anyway, is the ability to modify the CSS. So you'll notice that a lot of the add-ons that use jQuery behind the scenes to do cool little things like an accordion that we're going to see in a couple of minutes, do so by just simply swapping out the appropriate CSS styles. So anytime that you go off and you get an add-on that uses jQuery, there's almost always going to be some level of CSS files that come along with that. So again, like John was mentioning before, why in the world am I ever going to want a package for JavaScript? Well, that's why. It's not always just JavaScript. There could be surrounding components like CSS files that need to come along for the ride. All right, so speaking of libraries that build on top of jQuery, we have jQuery UI. jQuery UI is going to give us our cool little widgets, things like our date picture. In English, that is date pickers.
Well done.
Thank you. I knew I could do it. All right. I'm getting a standing ovation over there. We got our dialog boxes, and we can do things like add in our menus and autocomplete. We get our jQuery UI effects, things like slide down and our toggle, as well as our different utilities to make sure that everything is, in fact, where we want it on our page. So let's kick on over, take a look at a demo here. So, discard.
Hey, while it's doing that, can we switch over to my monitor real quick? So I just wanted to show out a few websites to point out a little more about what you're talking about. So along the way, there's the jQuery site, and this does there's some great in-page resources here. So it explains, here's how it works. It talks about, the idea you can get stuff, and then you can work on them in bulk. And there's a lot of kind of in-page. If I click on how jQuery works, it's got all these kind of in-page effects that'll show you that. So jQuery is the kind of tight core, and it's a DOM manipulation library. It's very simple for getting access to elements and then updating or changing those elements and binding to events. And then on top of that is jQuery UI, and these are things that are very useful widgets, but you don't want to ship this in the box with jQuery and slow down all these pages that may or may not use those. So jQuery UI has a lot of great things in it. Like you mentioned, all these widgets, so things like date pickers and stuff like that. Very handy. Also, they're all themable, so you can go through and theme these, and you can create your own theme. So the way that this is integrated into ASP.NET MVC, it works very well. You can replace those jQuery UI themes.
Yep.
One other thing I wanted to point out that's just kind of like for getting an idea of what jQuery does just kind of all by itself, I like to play with sites like JSBin. So what I've got here is I've got an HTML snippet on the left, and then here's some jQuery. And you can chain things. So I can say, find me something with an ID of monkey, so div ID monkey. And then it's just going to, in series, it's going to fade it out. It's going to fade it in. It's going to create a UL. And then it's going to wire up a click handler. So it says .click, and it says, when the click happens, hide, change the color, and fade in. So this is a lot of different things. And now if I run this, so that, see how it faded out and faded in. And now I've got a UL with a list item, and that list item, when I click it, fades out and fades in green. So, I mean, this is kind of silly, but hopefully it kind of gives this idea of you're chaining things, so you're able to, like you said, you're able to query by IDs or element types or classes, and then you can kind of chain these methods. And again, you don't have to memorize them. You can go to the jQuery site to learn more about that.
If you want to kick right back to that tab that you had over there, what you're going to notice, and this is what John was just mentioning, and this is one of the beauties of jQuery, is that once I grab an item, I can then essentially just give it a series of commands that, just like it's printed out, fade in, I want to modify it, and I also want to add on a click event handler all in one shot. So it makes your JavaScript development just that much easier, that you're not always having to worry about declaring variables and messing around with things like that. On top of that, in this particular case, he's using something with an ID. But if he had utilized a class instead, and of course with a class we could get back multiple elements, the fade out, fade in, append, and click would have applied to every single element that had that class. So coming back to us generating our HTML on the fly, quite frequently, we're going to have, let's say, in our case, a list of sessions, or we're going to have a list of speakers, or we're going to have a list of comments. And I maybe want to set it up where if you click on a particular comment, that I'm going to highlight that, or I'm going to turn that to green, or I'm going to delete that, or whatever it is that I want to do, then I could go in, set up a class for the comment as I'm displaying it out, and then inside of my jQuery, I go in, I find it by the class, I set up the appropriate code, and it will automatically apply to every single element that had that class applied.
Right.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you. You were in the middle of setting up an accordion, I think.
Well, I was getting there, but yes.
Okay.
So let's come back on over to my monitor here. And what I want you to notice is I've simplified a couple of things here. First of all, you're going to notice right here that I am making a call to my content themes base CSS. And if I bring back up my bundle config, you're going to notice right down here, this is all of the CSS files for jQuery UI. Now, if you're curious as to where jQuery UI came from, that was part of this template. So if I open up my content, for example, and I go to my themes and I go to base, there is all of the CSS files that I'm going to need for jQuery UI, and you'll notice right here that it's pulling them all in for me. The other part that you'll notice, if I open up my scripts, is that once again, everything that I need is right inside of there. Now, if I was maybe using an empty project and I wanted to add that in, like we were mentioning before, simply right-click, Manage NuGet Packages, and inside of here, just simply do a search for whatever it is that you happen to be looking for. So if you were looking for jQuery, if you were looking for Entity Framework, whatever it is, you can go in and grab that from here.
One other thing too, if you can expand out on the left, the installed packages. I don't know if this was clear enough, but these are all the ones that are already installed in your application.
Exactly.
So you can do the search installed packages in the upper right, and you can say, what jQuery packages do I already have here, that kind of thing.
Yep, exactly. Cool. So let's do this. The other part, or I guess the other cake that I baked while we were at lunch is right over here, our speaker index page. So let me open this up, and you'll notice that this is going to loop through every single speaker. And for every single speaker, it's going to make a call out to another little controller, another little action that we've got set up for our session, get for speaker. And just to show it real briefly, and I know we've seen a lot, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there, but if I open this back up, you're going to notice there's my get for speaker, and it will go off and find all the sessions for that particular speaker. And you'll also notice that if I come over here to my views, there is my get for view. Now, what I really want you to take away from this for right now is that there's not a whole lot that's overly fancy going on here. That I'm just simply looping through all of my speakers, putting the name into an H3. The sessions that speaker is going to be delivering are going to be dropped right into there. And you'll notice that all of those are going to be contained inside of a div tag. This is a very just standard display. I mean, there's really nothing that's overly fancy here. Haven't done anything special.
Another thing just to point out as you're doing this is that with MVC, you'll find a lot of more files with tiny bits of code.
Yes.
You notice that all these files you're looking at 5-6 lines of code, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's very common. So let me bring this up. Let's go ahead and say speaker, hit enter. And you'll notice, by the way, I updated the initializer, and you'll notice that I added myself in and added in a couple more sessions there. So there is our little spot. Now, what I want to have happen is this, is when this page is open, I want John to be collapsed. I'm sorry. Strike that. Reverse it. I want that to be expanded.
Oh, good.
And I want myself to be collapsed.
I'm quite expansive. Trying to watch my weight, but go ahead.
And then when I click on Christopher, I want that to expand, and I want John to collapse. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. So, are we ready to do this?
Ready, sir.
Okay. First up, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I love this. Control K, Control S, surround with.
Beautiful.
HTML, enter, div, enter.
There's a lot. People don't realize how much is built into the editors. The JavaScript, CSS, and HTML editors are really good in 2012 and insane in 2013.
Yeah. It really is amazing. And again, you know, it's just one of those little things, and it saves you from having to open it up and close it down to just boom, done.
Yep.
You know?
And it indented it even.
Yeah,
Nice.
exactly. Yep, although it left that curly where I didn't want it, but that's okay.
Oh, well.
All right, yeah, you can't win them all. So let's go ahead and say ID equals, let's go ahead and say speakers. And then up top, I'm going to go ahead and say script. Now, I want to make sure that this executes once the document is loaded. Because the problem that we have is if I just immediately try to go find that item there, speakers, I don't know if that's been loaded. So I don't know if it's actually there yet. So that could wind up failing out. It could give me a null reference, etc. So I want to make sure that my document is loaded. And there's a handful of different ways that, that we can do this. The cool kids do this by just simply saying function and then putting the code inside of there. This is the shortcut or the cool kid way of doing document ready.
Right.
Yep, much easier.
Simpler. We've had several people ask for if you could just say again the keyboard shortcuts you're using, surround with especially.
Oh, absolutely. So the let's actually do three big ones. The three that I find, at least in my experience, a lot of people haven't necessarily worked with, but they're the three that I use constantly. Number one is comment. So if you want to comment a block of code, two-part keystroke, Control-K, Control-C, and if we want to see that in Visual Studio here, let's undo that. So Control-K, Control-C to comment. Now what's great about this is that this is context aware. So if you're looking at C#, if you're looking at XML, it will comment appropriately. To undo that, it's Control-K, Control-U to uncomment. The surround with is Control-K, Control-S. And then that will bring up the little snippet. And then I typed it, but you could just as easily have double-clicked on the HTML and then found whatever it was that you were looking for that way.
Great.
Okay. So I found my speakers item.
Perfect.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Dot.
Actually, that's a great. 'Cause we had that question. Some people asked about, IntelliSense, and yes, there is that jQuery IntelliSense.
There is jQuery IntelliSense. One of the things to keep in mind is that it does behave a little bit differently, because of course with jQuery, and I love jQuery and JavaScript. It's JavaScript. I love JavaScript. The problem is that JavaScript is so flexible that you truly can't figure out what an object can do unless you start going in and running all of the code. And so you'll notice that the IntelliSense will behave slightly differently. Because if we kick back to Visual Studio here, if I say accordion, if I'm in C# and I do that, it auto-completes.
Right.
It doesn't do it here, so you do need to get yourself into the habit of doing
So you got to hit the tab.
Yep, exactly. But that being said, and I don't want to beat up on the IntelliSense, I love the IntelliSense that's in here, that it truly is remarkable, especially when you compare this to previous versions. This still blows me away at what it's able to do. Okay, in any event, I want those little collapsible regions, and you're going to notice that I can do that in one line of code. I can name that in one line. So now, let's go ahead, come back over here. Let's say speaker, and now you'll notice that there is John. There I am. I'm getting a little bit of just some CSS things because of the template,
oh, yeah,
but that's okay. We'll roll with it. You will notice if I zoom in that there is the little down arrow there. There is the little sideways arrow there. There's just a little bit of CSS wonkiness is the phrase that I'm going to use there. That's going on. But you'll now notice that if I click that, or if I click that, those now expand and collapse away. And I did that in really one line of code. You've got to love it. Yeah, it's pretty slick. All right. I do believe that is our JavaScript and our AJAX, unless you've got anything else that you wanted to add.
That's it. That's a lot to cover in a session. So,
yes.
So we went through several things. We talked about, some high-level concepts with like jQuery UI, and then we talked about. I think where you went through beginning to end and took something from a page, made it a partial, and then that partial you did AJAX begin form, and then showing that. I think that kind of shows that all together, and you can combine that with other effects like jQuery and jQuery UI and do quite a bit.
Exactly. Yep. All right. What do you say we take 10?
Take 10.
All right, let's do that.